All right. So, um, I'm gonna dive in just to give a idea of what I wanted to talk about and cover for being as basics is I'm gonna talk about actually setting up a fleet and like the in-game mechanics of that, and that's pretty much gonna be the end of stuff in the game for the most part. Again, we're kind of limited without having access to a test server to actually do a ton of stuff. Although with was it Howard? Were you the one who offered to SRP everyone?
That is correct.
So in the future, we will tap Howard's wallet.
And here I was convinced that everything in a fleet happened to Neve.
I'm
Um,
also able to SRP if needed.
well, we'll see. But other than that, we'll talk about fleet setup mechanics, and then we're gonna talk about preparation for before just things to have in mind, things that you need to be thinking about before you even undock or take a fight. With that, the things that you need to know about your fleet as the FC. Then we'll talk a bit about actually like in a fight. So many fights are always different, so there's only a few big picture lessons that you can take. And we'll talk about decision making in the moment, calling primaries, things like that. And then I'm going to close us out with just general things to keep in mind, questions to have on in the back of your head throughout a fight as well. Things to be keeping an eye on. So to open, and I think this is probably the most important thing for being an FC. You, in reality, have one fucking job, and that is to make a decision from start to finish, whether it's, calling a primary or, deciding when to call the fleet for the evening or deciding what somebody's going to fly because they gave you options. Um, being too indecisive just keeps anything from happening. So, as we talk about everything, just remember main goal from the FC's perspective is to keep people pointed in the same direction and actually keep things moving along. Um, with that, I'm going to go ahead and stream for us a little bit and show some stuff about fleet setup. Oh God, what the fuck happened with the streaming button? This is weird.
It is very weird.
I hate this.
Pretty.
Yes, thank you. This is my Varger that Cookie's abandoned after lying and telling me Jita was nearby.
Oh, it's not actually Eve, it's Hello Kitty Online.
It was. I don't know if I have any other Varger skins actually. Nope.
I love how we have 3 times as many people in fleet as we do logged in game. I mean, in
Added
comms.
benefit of saying, that this doesn't require logging in. I'm gonna give it just make sure everyone, just a second, make sure all of you have a chance to join the stream who actually are able to watch. Because
Oh, I can
Is-
watch.
Can Hastebreaker watch?
I am watching. I see the Varger with the pretty pink.
I was watching Lost before I joined Discord. But you didn't hear that from me.
Are you actively driving right now?
Currently, I'm waiting for a train. Finish crossing the highway.
Yes, he is driving. Well distracted. Shame
I
on
guess
you.
I really didn't want to know.
all right, so
It's
real
not that I
quick,
watch it; I listen.
we're gonna talk about setting up a fleet, making advert, all that good fun stuff. So if you are not familiar with the fleet window over here, that's concerning. You should be. So when you open the fleet window, you see this little. You'll have this little drop-down menu over here. You can set defaults, settings and structures for fleets. I highly recommend setting some of these. It makes life a lot easier. But we'll assume that you do not have one set up, and we'll talk about what one might look like. So you'll be forming your fleet. First thing that you want to do, well, all this shit can go in really any order, but depending on what needs to happen. But the easiest thing to do, because it brings you over to find fleets, is my advert and creating an advert. So for creating an advert, oops, I hate that. I recommend, typically we do open fleet to corporation and alliance. I do not like using minimum standings. This can somewhat allow other people. This can have some unexpected interactions. For example, Kevin is able to join some random guy's fleet that fucking hates him, but the guy has him blue and has this setting on, and so Kevin can see every time their standing fleet is up. Don't do that. When you put up the advert, you'll get a lovely little thing right here for the advert. You can go ahead. You can link that anywhere. Lets people join. Hopefully Chongus isn't confused. With this, the other important thing to look at when setting up your fleet is the actual fleet structure. You can see here, defaults format sets up one wing, one squad. Right click on wing lets you create new squads. I always recommend making a number of them. And then the next thing that you'll want to do is go over to the 3-dot menu at the top right. And you are going to want to allow free move. This has some really great benefits, specifically people like Cookies or Paul that have a crap ton of alts. They can move themselves into squad command, and that allows them to invite all of their tunes, and you don't need to worry about it. This is also really useful if you happen to be working with other people from other corporations, because you can put one of them in squad command and leave them in charge of setting everything up. The one thing to keep in mind with free move is specifically that people cannot move themselves to a higher level than the owner of the fleet. So if I bring myself down to a regular squad member, people are not going to be able to take squad or wing command. That can cause some headaches. Other than that, in that drop-down menu, that is also where you can go ahead and where is it? I believe that's where the save fleet. Yes, store fleet setup. So that will store your squad numbers. It will store that you have free move set up. If you set a message of the day, it will also store that, which is really useful if you're doing some regular diving ops. So, for example, if we load the Therafosa fleet setup, you'll see that I automatically populate the fleet message of the day. So that makes things very easy. Look at that. Hi, sniped. The other thing that is worth thinking about is squads. You can set one of them as a default. So if for some reason Cookies has commandeered squad number 1 for his alts, it might be a good idea to set squad number 3 as the default to join. And what that means is that when people join the fleet, they will all be funneled into squad number 3 first. Excuse you, Sniped, this clearly says Therafosa. The only other thing to talk about for fleet setup is broadcast settings. So you can set broadcasts to show of certain types. You can filter which types. You can determine who can see your broadcasts and whose broadcasts you see. And you can even color code them. So in the 3-dot menu, you once again have broadcast settings. You can see here that I have not been flying Logi, so I do not have need armor and need shield on here. But you can also see I have them color coded. Shield is blue, armor is yellow, broadcasting a target is red. It makes seeing things in the broadcast history a lot easier. And very importantly, it lets you share your broadcast settings using that link so that somebody who might be new to using fleet broadcasts is able to actually get those set up, color coded with the right settings nice and easily. Let me see. Yeah, the one downside that I'll say, unfortunately, I do not believe at the moment there is a way to save different versions of broadcast settings. You cannot store multiple settings. So,
Can you drag the share broadcast settings thing into a note, like a notepad thing?
ooh, great question. I would assume
I
so.
wanted to try just that right now.
Good lord. Why do I have so many random notes?
Well, that's what happens when you fire
Yes, you
your
can.
secretary.
Well, looks like it does let you drag. So there you go. You can have different Logi DPS settings, and you should be able to share them. We should do some experimentation with that because that's a new thing to me, but it seems like it should work. The other really important thing is this little 4-way arrow in the bottom right, which says select who will receive this broadcast. You really want to make sure that the scope is set to everyone for pretty much everything that Wingspan does. I cannot imagine anything that we'd be doing where you would not want that setting. That is basically all of the in-game mechanics that I wanted to talk about. So, anything that needs to be clarified?
You might want to talk about how to do dick cannoning.
That's more of a piloting strategy than an FCing stuff. If we have time, I can talk about that at the end. But I think even is dick cannoning in our handbook?
I believe it is.
Yes, it is.
Well, there you go. Read the
I'm
handbook.
currently reading it, and I've not reached a point, but it is in the handbook. Yes.
Anything else?
Seems very straightforward.
That was the hope. That really is just the getting everything set up. But a good setup like that can make life a lot easier, especially if you put together a clear message of the day, because you can list out, for example, what specific roles you need filled in your fleet. Do you need Logi? Do you need a Dictor? And it can help people figure out what they need to do to get formed up without needing to ask you every time as a new person joins fleet.
I can see utility of having squads for, say, cap chain or rep chain, up and down, what have you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that is a common strategy as well.
You said you
So
can't put anyone above you in rights in the fleet. Can't you promote somebody to fleet leader?
you can. What cannot happen is somebody cannot move themselves above you
Okay,
using free move.
got it.
So if you're just a regular squad member, but you're the creator of the fleet, that can cause some issues with alts if people are trying to take squad command for their alt. Anything else? All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is preparation. Things before we even get to a fight. Um, Broadly in Eve, and I would say especially for Wingspan, fights are won before they're started. Knowing what you're doing, having a clear plan, knowing what you need to know about the situation, all of that is far more important typically, than what actually happens in a fight. With that in mind, as you are starting to do stuff, there are a few things that you want to um, make sure to deal with. First things first with preparing is teaching the fleet. So depending on who's joining, never assume that the people joining your fleet are going to have knowledge or experience with something. That's how you get somebody not broadcasting for reps. That's how you get split damage. So always do a run through of any of the most important basics. So, for example, when Mining Under the Influence had the eviction attempt, we went through the very basics of here is the button to broadcast for armor. Here when you want to broadcast for armor. Here is when you are too late to broadcast for armor and are likely dead. So don't take for granted those simple lessons because that will come to bite you in the ass. Um, other than that, it's also important to be deciding on a comp. So this is part of that always be making decisions. People are often going to join asking you what you need, and it's important that you have something in mind. It might be a actual formal comp like we have with Fetch or Nacho, or it might literally be, okay, we need DPS. But being able to answer those questions and having something in mind is really important. What I will say is don't be shy about asking people to link their fits. I can think of a number of times where I have made the assumption that somebody was fit micro warp drive and they were afterburner, or I assumed that they had a scram because I would have had a scram, but I never actually confirmed. So check fits, make sure everything's in order. Um, any fits that you're linking in the MOTD, if you're, for example, asking somebody to bring a jam goo, make sure that the fit that you're linking has everything it needs. For example, ammo in the cargo, nanite. I am notoriously bad for linking fits that have no ammo or an empty drone bay. And I have gotten yelled at because someone has bought them in a hurry. So don't do that. Don't be me. Other oh um, other prep stuff similar to again being ready to teach a fleet is be aware of your pilot's experiences. If somebody's new to fleets, and filling an important role, or if somebody's flying E-War for the first time, have some level of awareness of their prior experience, just so you know what you can expect out of them. And then be sure while you're talking to set standards. This might be as simple as saying, hey, this is a suicide fleet. We are all going to die horribly. But communicating the level of risk, for example, goes a long way towards making sure everyone has a good time. Other things that you might want to consider is procedures. So setting up backup plans. Who is the backup target caller in case you get killed or get pushed off grid? Are comms open comms? Can people just be chatting? Are there going to be broadcasts for reps? One really important thing is in most wingspan fleets where we do have Logi, we're usually small enough that people can say that they need reps on comms in case the broadcast didn't go through. But one of the procedures that we make sure we set up is always say your name. But we set that standard. You're allowed to talk on comms to call for reps, and this is how you do it. What specific procedures are important are gonna be depending on your situation and fleet and all of that. But effectively having some level of procedures and what people need to be expecting. Uh, with that in mind, it's also a good time at this point to think about strengths and weaknesses of your fleet. Are you a fast comp, slow comp, long range, high damage, high tank? Do you have strong E-War with your fleet? Just think about the things that you have going for you and the things that somebody might be able to take advantage of, very broadly. While thinking about those strengths, weaknesses, the things that you should know about your overall fleet includes what is your overall damage, your maximum possible damage? How likely is that damage to apply to different targets? Um, and what damage types? You know, I would a heavy assault missile Tengu fleet, great frickin' damage. But if we come up against, you know, interceptors, particularly Galente interceptors that have a strong kinetic resist, the actual damage we're going to get out of that fleet is negligible. So keeping those things in mind. With that, it's also important to keep in mind your range and speed for your entire fleet. It is really easy as a target caller where you're basically trying to fly, trying to fight, and also needing to think about everyone else to go, oh, this target's in range for me. Let's primary that. Not always the best thing. Have in the back of your mind, are you longer range than the rest of your fleet? Are you faster than the rest of your fleet? Because if you forget those things, you will find yourself calling primaries that other people can't even shoot. I will say, calling a primary that no one can shoot is still better than not calling a primary because people can start moving in that direction. So again, any decision is better than no decision. Other than that, also think about overall comp tank. Roughly how much damage can your fleet tank or mitigate? Particularly important if you have Logi. And what EWAR are you bringing? You know, do you have enough damps to knock something down to a negligible lock range? Are you relying on jams? And are you relying on rainbow fit jams potentially? All of those things are just some broad fleet characteristics that you really want to keep in mind because they're going to frame everything else that you do. They're going to be really important for deciding what you can engage and what you do once you start engaging. Next thing I'm going to talk about is what we do in a fight. So that's all the prep stuff I wanted to talk about. Thoughts, questions, complaints. If you have a complaint, ping Zeratul. But anything else? Neat. Either I'm putting everyone to sleep or I'm explaining things remotely well.
You're doing fine.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say.
Oh, sorry, Jinx. I didn't see that you typed in the White Rabbit Fleet channel. It's the squad command invite. So really, what that does is, when you right click on somebody to send an invite, you can decide if you're inviting them as a squad member, squad leader, wing commander, things like that. And then anybody in one of those leadership roles, squad or wing, can invite for any of the roles below them. Typically, the best way of dealing with it is the fleet commander, the owner of the fleet, should just be at the highest level. That way, anyone can just free move. People can join on their main, move themselves into squad command, and then deal with inviting their alts all on their own.
But in order for that to work, you have to have free move on.
Yes, you have to have free move on.
Got it.
So, I'm going to talk big picture of a fight and then in the moment some decision making stuff. Big picture of a fight, the guiding question that you should have in the back of your mind that's going to be informing your decisions is not very complicated. It is, how do I keep everyone from dying? With that in mind, it's a question of what are the crucial roles in your fleet that you cannot lose? For example, when we do nullsec roams with kiting comps, more often, not always, but 90% of the time, our damps are the crucial role. If the damps die, the fleet is over. We need to go reship. That is particularly the case if we're up against a marauder. It might be fast tackle because you need something to go grab scrams on stuff so that you guys can actually get in range. It could be logi. That's a obviously very common crucial role. And with that, what are your plans for protecting those crucial roles? So bringing jams, common crucial role, common very important role. Bringing a single jamming ship to fight a marauder and hope that it jams it out. Well, you need to find a way to protect your jams because odds are it's going to get one shot even at 90, 100 kilometers by most marauders. So make up those plans, recognize your linchpin ships, and find a plan to protect them. Yesterday, for example, Cookies, Sniped, and I were attempting to grab 4 ratting EOSs, and we were relying on jams because they were remote rep, crucial role for the comp. And we wanted to, one of the main things that we were trying to do is make sure that we took the fight where the jams were starting at range. We did not want to catch the fight with the jams starting 0 on a wormhole because that would have put them in a terrible position. So sometimes attempting to time the fight is the way to protect those roles. Didn't work very well for us last night, unfortunately, but you know, the spirit was there. The second big picture to keep in mind is what poses the biggest risk to your fleet. That might be simply just high damage stuff. That's obviously a always common big risk, but it might be fast tackle. Particularly if you're running a kiting comp. E-War can be really problematic if you are relying on Logi. One other massive risk that a lot of people overlook, Booshers. Command destroyers that are just going to rip half your fleet away or reposition people. Keep in mind, what are those things that pose the biggest risk to your fleet based on how you're flying it, and be sure to keep an eye out for them. And when it comes to making decisions, that might mean assigning somebody whose job it is to shout out on comms if they see something like a Boucher coming in close so that you can make sure it gets scrammed and killed. On the reverse side, you want to ask yourself, what if you're as you're starting a fight, looking at a target, what are their crucial roles? This will likely be Logi, command links, tackle, E-War, the FC, or an anchor. And from that, how can you remove or mitigate the things that are posing a risk to you or playing a crucial role for them? This can be, there's a number of different strategies for doing stuff like this that might work. ECMing, damping things out is the easy solution for a lot of this. But again, anchors can be a really important thing. If everyone is orbiting and approaching the same person, well, you can cause a lot of chaos by burning them down first and just trying to burn through their tank. Or you can also ruin the other fleet's ability to mitigate damage by webbing down the anchor. If everyone's stuck on the anchor and he's slow, everyone's going to be slow. Other things might be launching light drones and telling people to put light drones on tackle. One example of how we took care of crucial roles with the Mining Under the Influence eviction defense, we jammed out Logi, and then we burned down the Logi that couldn't get jammed, starting with the anchor to put everything into chaos. We headshot the Logi anchor. Similar types of things here, identifying not just what's posing a risk to you, but what is holding their fleet together and how can you disrupt that. Alrighty. That's the big picture principles that I feel very strongly about when it comes to actually dealing with a fight. Questions? Thoughts? Alright. Well, then
You have you didn't mention having like a backup. Actually, I think you did right at the beginning. Sorry, never mind.
No, it's a really good point, and it's always worth mentioning again. Having a backup target caller. One thing that is, I actually didn't write this down, and it's a really good thing to do, is as another big principle is finding ways to offload responsibilities as the FC. Again, your job is to make decisions, and so you might assign somebody to be watching DScan. You will want to have a backup target caller in FC. Have that decided. Other things that might be useful for offloading responsibility is assigning somebody else to actually be the anchor for the fleet. Going back to the mining under the influence eviction defense, I explicitly assigned Rocket to be the FC's second brain. And so Rocket took responsibility for noticing if things were changing, making sure that people were shooting the right target. And at one point, Rocket even overrode the FC because the FC called a primary and Rocket pointed out that there was a target that was already below half shields. So having a second set of eyes, for example, can be really useful. So secondary FC, absolutely, backup target caller, but also thinking of other ways to offload the responsibilities so that you can focus on making the best decisions. And particularly if you're able to offload things to that you might not be as good at to someone that might be better. So, you know, Sniped, I think, is very good at putting fits together. So if somebody comes in and is offering me a couple options of things and I'm trying to worry about other stuff, I might ask Sniped to say, Sniped, can you help them decide a fit? Delph was a very good manual pilot, so he makes an excellent anchor. Things like that. Anything
What
else?
is something you would not offload? Something that you would hold as FC completely.
I typically hold target calling. That like that in once you get rid of target calling it, you're, almost not really an FC if you get rid of that. But on the other hand, I think anything is um, offloadable, to be honest. In the end, the in Wingspan, the content finder is the FC by default, and even if that means that you don't do anything during the fight, what you do retain as FC is, okay, how are we handling this situation? Are you like you might, follow somebody else's ideas, but in the end the final say is with the FC of how you're going to handle the situation. That um might be questions of, are you going to put out bait? Are you going to try to spook the target to get them to warp towards you? Are you going to try to slow roll the fight to get them to bring out more stuff? Are you going to leave? That is those big picture decisions are the heart of being an FC. And as much as I would probably never offload target calling, there's certainly a case for making somebody the target caller, and you're still FC. So in reality, like, as long as you're still assigning responsibilities, even if you assign away every in the fight responsibility, you are still FC because you are the one in charge of organizing. However, I think target calling and being ready to engage in the moment is what most people expect from the FC, at least, even if that's not the heart of it, in my opinion. Anything else?
Sorry if I go back to your previous point, but you talked about like considering the strengths and weaknesses of your fleet, and what if you are running like a complete kitchen sink where everybody's running something else because I don't know, you made it up spontaneously because you found content or
Yeah,
something?
happens all the time. And so, what that really needs to be thought of as is there's a lot of weaknesses in that comp, but there are going to be things with strengths in a kitchen sink comp. So Paul, he likes to fly blaster Proteuses. That is a heavy armor, MWD scram web, great for holding something down, webbing something down up close, putting a lot of damage onto it. Other of our pilots are a very common thing is going to be the kite Loki. That comes with it long web range. That's one of its strengths. You might have somebody choosing to bring newts. So what you're really, while you might not have a cohesive strength and weakness, you do still bring things to the board. And so the weaknesses that you might need to be thinking about could be stuff like, okay, we have a Brawl Proteus and we're going after, a Marauder. How are we that is a weakness. How is that Proteus going to stay alive? And it might be, you know, that it needs to load null and kite at 15 kilometers. That is what you ask. So what I'll say is the more kitchen sinky that you get, the more it becomes important to know every single fit in your fleet. Um, and
Is there
then,
something you would?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Or is there something you would consider mandatory? Like, I don't know, you're sitting out there and you're like, um, hell, we need a dictor. Somebody has to go home and get a dictor or something.
Um, that's never going to go over well with Wingspan. We have no like forcing anyone to fly anything. You know, the fact of the matter is, in the end, sometimes you're just going to be you're dealing with the hand you got dealt. I mean, that's how Cookies and I yesterday ended up trying to jump 4 EOSes using a bomber, a Dictor, a Falcon, and a Varger. Because that's all we had available with the numbers that we had and where everything was located. So, what I would say is you might end up being dealt a really shit hand, and the answer might be that you don't decloak or you don't take a fight, just because you have no chance. It's happened. But there are like roles that, like I said, are crucial roles. A Dictor is definitely one of them for a lot of ganks. So what you can do is, and I would recommend doing, is coming up with what you want to see early on, so that when people join the fleet, they see, in the MOTD, hey, we need a Dictor. Hey, we need damps. Because for the most part, people are going to bring what is needed if you ask them. It just is important to ask them beforehand and recognize that we can't make them. But yeah. And with the kitchen sink fleet, as I said, it becomes more and more important to understand every single fit in your fleet. And one strategy for that is dumbing down and simplifying them to, what it what is its most unique thing that it brings to the fight that's good, and what is its biggest weakness. So, the Proteus, high damage, that's its best strength. Its weakness, shit range. So, things like that. Anything else?
One of the things that I don't know if this is commonly done, but I do when you mentioned it, talking about being on the lookout for specific things like boosters and things like that. You can open up a like second overview window and have a dedicated overview tab for command destroyers, black ops ships, things like that. So that if those ships show up on grid, they only show up in this side overview tab, and that's what I do sometimes.
Great strategy. Love that. If you have the screen real estate, absolutely. Otherwise, that's a perfect thing to potentially offload as a different responsibility. Haste, I feel like I saw that did you want to say something?
I was gonna ask how you deal with what happens when, let's say, a battle spans several systems and there's gates between you, and how you deal with shot calling via other systems. Do you just hand it off to whoever's over there, or do you ask them to like run things by you? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I would
Um,
say that if you are going to try to call shots for a fight that you are not in, you better be leagues and leagues ahead of anybody else that could possibly be calling those shots. Like,
So, like, I mean, and for instance, you tell them, like, okay, if you have 3 people chasing you, you're going to take off and try and drag them further away from us, and we can handle what we're dealing with here, if, for instance, or other tactical ideas. Like, you give them free reign, like, okay, you guys figure it out, but I need you to drag these people away, or what have you.
I'd say, yeah. Broadly speaking, it becomes that second level situation. As particularly if you have knowledgeable people in your fleet, um, odds are, especially when they're in the situation, they're going to have more specific, better ideas, and so sometimes it really does become better to communicate purpose. You know, um, again, going back to the attempted EOS gank last night with cookies. What we decided was, I mean, we had a bunch of different ways of doing it, but what we decided is we wanted to try to spook them into warping back to their home hole. That was the goal. A lot of different ways to achieve that. So with your situation, it might be, hey, don't die. That's the goal. Just don't die. Deal with it however you need to not die. Or it might be, hey, keep them entertained over there for a little bit. We've had that happen. Delay, things like that. So I would say, and communicate those goals, but not necessarily how exactly to achieve them if you're not actually in the system.
Yeah, like the most common one for wingspan would be like, for example, the majority of the fleet is on one side of the wormhole and we have a few people on the other. It would be just to like get them off the hole or get them to jump into us. Like those kind of things is what you'd try to get them to do, and you wouldn't like micromanage them or whatever.
I remember one time being in a fleet where we were fighting on both sides of a hull, and the hull collapsed, so the fleet split in two, and we had our own FC for each part of the fleet since they now had no way of like interacting with each other.
That was with Evie. I remember that.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I think that kind of goes all the way back to preparation and knowing how knowledgeable your pilots are. Because,
Certainly, so it would help to, yeah, just have players of a skill level where you could say, okay, we're all, if you're on your own, you know what to do, kind of deal. And you just tell them, hey, we're gonna have this goal and follow that goal. And if they can rejoin, great. If not, at least they're serving a purpose for the primary.
yeah. And I will say Wingspan is in large part pretty fucking competent with these kinds of things compared to a lot of other groups because, I mean, in so many other groups, PvP is only ever a fleet activity. I'm not saying that Wingspan is good pilots, sorry guys, but a lot of our time is spent solo PvPing and making our own decisions. And so being told, achieve this goal however you want, that is something that a lot of times Wingspan can do very well and a lot better than groups that only PvP in fleets because a lot in those groups that only PvP in fleets, their pilots are not as used to just having responsibilities and decisions thrust on them. Anything else? All right. So let's talk very quickly in the moment, the decisions that you'll be making during a fight. Um, the first and most important decision is what are you primarying? Anytime that you do not have a target called, your fleet's DPS is 0. So having a primary is the most important thing, in my opinion, just to keep the fight going and keep your fleet making progress.
And make sure to call a new primary soon enough before the last one's dead so that everyone can lock them before the first primary dies.
Yes. Well, yeah. If you can, think ahead and call secondaries and tertiary targets. That's always ideal. Um, when it comes to choosing a primary, there's a number of things that I would say. There's three things that can really help you identify a good and viable primary target. First, are there any sources of risk on the other side or crucial roles on the other side that you are unable to mitigate, but you can kill? So, a Boucher that lands at 0 and got scrammed. Don't fucking just hold it and, sit with it there. Burn it off grid. Kill it. Do they have jams that you're able to snipe off grid? Do it. So, if you can't mitigate the crucial role or the risk, kill it. Second, any targets that have already taken a lot of damage. This happens when people split damage, or a lot of times it'll happen when the FC has not called a primary fast enough. People will just start shooting something. So keep an eye out. If something is already halfway through its tank, might as well, push it all the way through. And then third, talking about efficiency. So this is just things that are maybe not, you know, death sentences to your fleet, but targeting things that are potentially somewhat high risk or high DPS and lower in tank. So, for example, we would probably not want to primary a damnation or a prophecy when there is a thorax on grid, for example. Thorax is super light tank, very high DPS if it's in range. Exec navies, similar things. So effectively, it's going in order of what was I not able to mitigate that is important to deal with. Primary that. Is there anything that is already halfway dead? Take care of that. Okay. What is available that I can kill quickly? Every time you kill a target on the other side, you are reducing that fleet's DPS. Now, with that in mind, there are things that are going to impact how efficient a target is. So like I said, we want efficient targets, high DPS, low tank, ideally, for example. But efficiency can be improved or reduced by considering things like, is your fleet within range to do damage? Or is only part of your fleet going to be able to do damage? Is the target likely to warp off? If you don't have tackle and it's a target that'll have a lot of time to align, well, might not be the most efficient target if you're looking for the kill. Could be perfectly worth it though if you just want it gone. But remember, if it just warps off, it very likely could come back. Third, what is the target ship's resists? If we're in a Tengu fleet, shooting kinetic missiles, I am not going to be primarying Galente Tech 2 ships. That is going to be terribly inefficient. So keep in mind the damage that you have available, as we talked about very early on, and the resists of the potential target. Other than that, damage application for the weapons that you have. What is, if you're using torpedoes, you're not going to want to be shooting something that has high velocity or small sig. You're going to do negligible damage. So keep in mind damage application. And then keep in mind that there might be ways for you to mitigate the target's tank that makes it significantly more efficient. Can you newt out an active rep or active hardeners? Is it possible that the target is too far away from enemy logi, and if you put sensor damps on the logi, they won't be able to rep it? Does it have an ancil rep or a cap booster that you can put pressure on and bring the target to a reload so that it loses its tank? Things like that are ways for you to mitigate a target's tank. With that, throughout the entire fight, the last things to keep in mind are, as Rocket already mentioned quickly, and very worth mentioning, obviously, because I have it here for another thing to keep in mind. Always broadcast a target. Always have a target, and I do literally mean broadcast. It's one thing to call primaries, but there is a shortcut. I think it defaults to X click to broadcast a primary to your fleet.
It is X.
So do that. It allows people to lock from the broadcast window so that they don't need to look at their overview. Pay attention, be aware of your fleet's positioning. You know, again, it's important to understand whether or not you're going to actually be in range of the target that you're trying to shoot. If you are up against Logi, it's useful to have some sense of how much they are able to rep. Because it's important to know whether or not you can break their Logi with just your DPS, or you need to think about, are there ways to punch through their Logi? Going back to the mining under the influence eviction defense, that during that fight, the entire strategy was alphaing shit off grid with cruise missiles. You know, it didn't matter that we might not have been able to break through the Logi because we killed stuff fast enough that the reps didn't land. So even if our DPS was not high enough to break their reps, it was enough to get to beat their reps before they even landed. Things like that, punching through. Also, think about whether or not your Logi can hold. Um, you know, knowing whether or not you're likely to be able to permanently tank a fight is really important to think about. Also, think about how you can mitigate drones. This is one that I think I'm not great at, but I think can make a. I mean, it made a massive difference during the eviction fleet defense. I've seen it make massive differences elsewhere. So, you know, every flight of light drones, even unbonused, is, you know, between 50 and 80 DPS. That is not nothing. You also might have ECM drones, and so smart bombing them, if any of your ships have smart bombs, can help really reduce the damage on grid. Or a lot of times drones will get assigned and put onto things like Addictor or Fast Tackle. You can do what we call taking the drones for a ride. Heat your prop mod, burn in a straight line, pull them away from the fight. Because if they want to reassign those drones to a new target, that's going to make them have to fly back 100 plus kilometers. So, useful strategy to mitigate the damage from drones right there. Other things to be asking yourselves are, do you need to engage in target swapping to punch through Logi or reps? You know, um, are you trying to catch them off guard and punch through the Logi slash reps? And if so, pay attention to when the reps catch and the target is holding so that you don't waste damage so that you can move to a new target. A lot of people are very hesitant to change targets once they've started making progress on one, even if it's not going to die. It is a pretty severe sunk cost fallacy that you don't want to fall into. Lastly, and actually lastly, what are any battlefield changes that you need to know about? This is things typically like if your Logi has died, or any of them have died at all, if you have lost one of your E-War ships, or if something new is showing up on DScan. Be aware of those changes that you need to know about and assign somebody to tell them to you. You know, it's very common for me to tell Logi, hey, if you're dying or someone's dying, please tell me. Or, you know, E-War needs to call out if they had to warp off grid, things like that. Because those are often, like I said, crucial roles to make the comp and fight work, and you do not want to find out that they left and you did not know about it.
It sounds like it would be important to fleet culture and expectations to line that up beforehand as well. When you're doing the other stuff, is like, hey, if you're dying or you're having to leave, just let us know before you're gone so we can rearrange.
Yes, that goes all the way back to preparation, 100%. This is an important expectation that should be set up before you are even undocked. And counter to that is a expectation of, which especially in like 30 plus people fleets. Hey, if you are a damaged ship and you are dying, shut up about it. I don't care. You know, sometimes comms needs to be open for other people. So setting that expectation early, yes. But that is everything I have. So
On that last thing, never say I died. That is not useful to anybody ever. Say what ship you are died, or the pilot if the FC knows what ship you are flying.
yes. So yeah, I died. No. Hey, ECM died. Yes, useful. It's similar to the never say, I need reps. I don't know who I is.
So would you generally prioritize targets like whatever is a specific danger, like a Boucher or something, then whatever dies fastest, and excluding things that you cannot really engage? Like if you have a brawling fleet and there's a sniping tank with 200k out, you don't need to bother because you can't get him. Is that
Yeah,
about it? Yeah.
pretty much
Okay.
when it comes to primarying. Things become a little bit unusual when you have a wonky comp potentially, like kitchen sink stuff. That sniping Tengu, okay, yeah, sure, you know, it's 200 kilometers away, but if you have a kiting Loki with a faction long point, odds are it could get out there, snag it, and solo kill it and get that damage off grid. So, when it comes to wingspan style kitchen sink comps, you'll find some situations where you actually might want to be splitting primaries and sending one person to go do something. But that requires having the brain space and the mental capacity to realize those opportunities and not being overwhelmed by everything else that's going on.
How
And
much would you encourage to people to decide that for themselves? Like if I'm that Loki pilot and I know I can do that, I'm just gonna take that Tango out.
never.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
well,
if you,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. What were you gonna say, Rocket?
I was gonna say that if you've been given a primary, you should keep shooting that.
Yeah. Broadly, I'd agree. It's mostly because, you know, sure there might be an opportunity there, but as FC, you already are thinking about how much damage your fleet has, and if that Loki goes off on a side quest, and doesn't and makes that decision without you having an awareness, you're down 800 DPS.
Yeah. And your
Um,
focus suffers.
but
It might be worth talking about if there's like spare, if the comms is clear enough for it to be understood.
there are also ways to address this similar to the way that we address what Haste was asking about with giving um, directions to somebody who's not in system. Similar strategies can be used here. So um, going back to like Paul flying a buffer Proteus, um, if we're in a kitchen sink comp and he's the one with scrams and blasters, one of his things might be, hey Paul, if you see a Boucher, scram it and kill it, no matter what. So thinking of those types of opportunities, like, hey, kiting Loki, if there happens to be E war at range and you see the opportunity to kill it, do it. That way, you've given them the freedom to determine. You've given them a broad goal again, and you're aware that that ship is may or may not be available to assist with your primary.
And if you are the Loki pilot and you recognize there may be an opportunity, like let's say you see the Tengu, he's 200 off, and you know you can combat probe him and warp on top of him, maybe just suggest it to the FC if the comms are clear. Just be like, FC, I can do this, and then they'll either say yes or no, and then that's that basically.
And that goes back to the number one principle of FCing: make a goddamn decision. You know, might be the wrong one, but you don't want to find yourself sitting there waffling like, should we go to the Tengu? So, anything else? What I'll say, it is FCing is something that I feel like you only get good at through practice. I can come here and I can talk about the way that I organize my thoughts in this, and it might prove helpful, but nothing will make up for actually just getting out there and doing it and wiping a fleet or two. And remembering alongside the principle of your job as a decision maker, the other thing is to, as best as possible, either remain or at least convey a sense of calm. Um, Nobody wants an FC screaming at them. That's really not fun. So, or an FC like a outing after a loss. It sucks, but it'll happen. And so finding ways to keep a positive attitude as well.
And please do FC, and like don't be scared of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it all goes again right on back to preparation. If you communicate the risk, are you going to go on a nullsec roam that is intended to end in a bloody massacre for all of you? Wonderful. Say as much. People will fit accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's actually the most important part of a wingspan fleet is communicate to everyone involved how risky it is because someone might not fully understand and they'll bring their 3 bill and be like, oh, I just lost it. I was not expecting to go into this super dangerous situation. Like, for example, if you suspect a praxis is baiting you, just communicate that to everyone involved so that they'll be a little bit more prepared to lose the ships they're bringing.
So here's a question coming from a total noob. Is there an easy way of learning different ship classes and specifications of what they can and can't do to your fleet?
Um, so broadly, you know, there's each race has its own E-war that it specializes in. Um, each race also has general characteristics that you can know about. So like Caldari missile ships almost always, not 100%, but almost always have a strong kinetic damage bonus, a stronger kinetic damage bonus. Um, Galente ships that aren't drone boats, they're going to be locked to kin therm damage. Laser ships going to be locked to EM thermal. And then also knowing, for example, that Amar, their primary E-war is weapon disruption. Their secondary is nuding. And so if you see an Amar ship, you can make some assumptions about it. So knowing those patterns of what's the primary weapon system is it a damage locked weapon system? What's the secondary weapon system for a race? You can also you can typically know their primary tank, armor or shield. And that should let you, instead of having to know every single ship in the game, it should let you at least start to just think about what the hell is going on.
Things like Mimitar missile ships usually project worse and apply better than Caldari missile ships. Like, this irrelevant, or is that a bit too fine detail?
You can
Depends what our
also
fleet is in.
look at the ship. Like if you look at the ship and physically zoom in, you'll see what it's fitted with.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to try doing that in the middle of a fight. The main thing is like in reality, you need to have an approach for dealing with when you go and you gank a Praxis, and then 10 things land in out of warp on top of you. That oh shit, a ton of things just landed on grid unexpectedly. That is what that is what all of this is largely preparing you for. Because recovering from that is probably the pinnacle of in the moment FCing, in my opinion. Typically, we just wipe. So yeah. The other thing that I would say is accept that you'll have limited knowledge of ships for a while as you learn more about the game, and you know, take advantage of the knowledgeable people in your fleet that you can ask questions to or assign responsibilities to, and also make the decisions with the information you have. You know,
Don't forget to leverage Zkill. You could do a pretty quick search for somebody in their ship and come up with their fit in a reasonable amount of time.
also very useful. But yeah, so like, but you know, you might not know what the fuck the bonuses are for a Maelstrom and how it plays against your fleet, but you will know it's a battleship because it'll show you, and there might just be happen to be a battle cruiser that you are aware of that is not that is like a harbinger. Those aren't super tanky. Well, you know, shoot the thing that you know is a decent target rather than gambling with the one that you don't.
I'm sorry, sir. I feel like you're asking me to use my brain.
Yeah, Jinx again. If you need a break, you can go back to possibly FCing incursion fleets. Pretty brain dead over there.
Fair, fair.
Home fronts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's everything I wanted to cover. I really do wish that we had planned to potentially do red versus blue.
I wanted to ask, are you planning to like iterate on this, like more sessions like this today? And what would you focus on?
So the only other session like this that I've typically run is a how to FC a gank, and that's going over the types of common or like directions you'll want to give a fleet, strategies for tackling, strategies for getting on grid with a target without being noticed. Basically, going from a solo diver to ganking a target and what that means. Um, we used to run training fleets for stuff like that, but the next step for learning how to FC, in my opinion, is well, there's two things really. One, just doing it and getting some experience, and two, after action reports. We don't do them as often nowadays, but you know, talking about what worked, what didn't work, lessons learned, things like that, how you could have succeeded if you were doomed no matter what. And we do, I think, do we have the yeah, we have an after action report thread channel that you can post in. And so even if you aren't FCing, you can learn a lot, I think, by engaging with those with an action after action report conversation after a fleet, because you can see the person who was FCing grapple with their decisions and think about it, and that can help you learn as well. But I'd be happy to run a how to gank session. It is quite a bit different than this because it basically ends at the just call a primary if you get blobbed, and it mainly focuses on the getting in position and setting up to actually grab a target.
Yeah, 90% of wingspan FCing is figuring out how to actually tackle the target without being seen.
Bubbles.
Which brings us back to the topic of dick cannons.
That is true. Well, I'll give a quick Dick Cannon lesson. So, um, Dick Cannons are a product of and they're a really good strategy for any type of tackling. But they're a product of the way that fleet warp mechanics function. So when you warp a squad or a group of pilots, you all warp at the speed of the slowest warping ship in that group. That means if you have a Dictor and a T3, and the T3 combat probes a target, and squad warps the Dictor along with it, that Dictor is warping not at the speed of a hyperspatial Dictor, it's warping at the speed of a T3 cruiser. That is not ideal. But it only warps at the speed of the ships that enter warp. And so the person doing the scanning and initiating warp can flag themselves exempt from fleet warp. When you are flagged exempt, you never enter the warp tunnel, and only the people below you in that squad enter warp. And so if it is only the Dictor, what you can do is combat probe the target with the T3 and warp the Dictor right there at the proper speed. So that is what we call a Dick Cannon.
That's good to know. I like that.
Yeah, it's actually I think one of our relatively newer tactics. I think that's only been something that we figured out in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah, I don't even know why it came up. We just randomly decided to try that.
Yeah, I don't remember why it came up either, but I was very very excited when we tried it and it worked. Go
I
ahead.
was actually Dick Cannon like a year ago or 1.5 successfully onto a target, and that was surprisingly fun.
Yeah, that's everything I've got. So like I'm probably gonna hang out on comms for a bit in case anyone wants to ask anything, but class dismissed, I guess.
Yeah,
And
thank you
so
very much. It was very informative.
yeah, I wish we had CC available and that we could fuck around with a bunch of different fits and try things out. But CCP hates us.
I will never understand why they would shut down a test server. It makes no sense to me at all.
Well, I can tell you that they want people to actually go out and lose stuff rather than perfecting stuff on the test server before going and then perfecting it on the real server.
So you should fucking go train in real life, like
Exactly.
civilization. Yeah.
They want people to not get perfect fits or perfect solutions before they go and use it for real. They want to increase the amount of risk people have to take.
Mm. And what if we would take like super cheap tier 1s and just train like that in 2 groups? Red versus blue.
You run into some limitations of like what you can do because like, if you get 10 people showing up and you do a 5 and 5 split, well, it's pretty easy to end up running into a comp where like neither side can kill anything.
Yeah.
Um, but one other option is that we can very kindly ask Casebreaker and some of our other friends at Mining Under the Influence if they would like to set up a brawl again. We did it a while ago and it was quite a bit of fun, and I'm sure that we could do it again.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm absolutely certain there would be interest in that. We have a lot more people in wormholes now as well.
Quick question. I was napping. Was this recorded?
Should have been.
Yes.
Cool. You could always visit Zyth too.
Yeah, what I'll say is, again, most important thing is getting out and practicing, and the number one way to find opportunities to practice FCing is to dive, 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 and find targets to form fleets up for. as much as on Saturday, tomorrow, we're going to sit down and try to schedule some planned fleets. I mean, gonna be honest, just roaming doesn't always bring the best content nowadays. Diving really does.
And also, don't forget, there is that new core project. Every wormhole you scan out, you get big bucks.
Big
Yes.
bucks. That's right.
Hey, it's significantly more than we used to pay for per wormhole using that same type of project.
And also,
Well, yeah,
Zane, just for tools in your trade, like I said, I do have a Sino Tengu ready to go in Jita if you're trying to use that.
Nope, you are not allowed to use it because I want to fly my Sino tune.
fair.
No, I want to find
Yeah.
my Sino tune.
In reality, the more Sinos that we have, the better for Blops fleets, actually. Just because it lets us spread out and hunt better.
And also have like a return Sino to get the fuck out immediately.
BB style.
Exactly. But yeah, well, I know it's not tomorrow for fleet planning, but one of the things that I thought we might end up trying to do is I can't remember who recommended a scepter swarm, and I quite like that idea, but pairing a scepter swarm along with putting all of our scanning, like dedicated virtue pod scanning tunes in the same chain to push it out very far, very fast. Take advantage of the scepter's warp speed to get around the chain to kill things.
The wormhole space locust swarm.
Exactly.
That actually sounds fun.
Yeah, I think so too.
I'm gonna be the first one that gets lost.
Plus,
What
10
scepters would be,
scepters. Sorry, go ahead.
what scepters would be best for that? Like Tyrannuses or something, so we could apply 1,000 or so DPS in brawling.
Um, I probably would do the Crusader.
Let's be real. This is Wingspan. It'd be whatever people can fly. So it'd be Atrons.
Yeah, I don't think I can actually fly any scepters.
You assault,
Seriously, not even a travel scepter?
you assault frigates.
Yeah, at that
Look,
point
I
you might
have
as
very narrow skill training on this character.
if you're doing assault frigates, you might as well fly Proteuses.
Yes, Proteuses.
I think in all actuality, it's probably most likely that people are gonna be able to fly a missile boat of some kind. Since that's what most of us train into is missiles.
Unleash the
So-
breachers.
Well, Rocket, you could fly a Dramiel.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't warp as fast as a scepter still, so.
I think a malediction swarm would be fun.
Crusader maledictions are a little low DPS.
Crusaders use lasers. No one uses that.
Only James uses lasers.
Do claws.
Well, in reality, it would literally be just the whatever scepter you want to fly, fit for brawling damage. But
Any of them, you say?
the main thing would be everyone in a ship that has a similar warp speed to get around. Because you don't want to leave half your fleet behind because they decided to fly assault frigates like fucking noobs.
I'll bring in an imp then.
Go for it.
No.
Just make sure we all get to kill Melhor on you.
Lol. Or the whiptail.
Whiptail. Or crap, what's the faction Minmatar ship I used to forget that I used to play with a lot?
Firetail?
The Firetail? The Firetail's fun.
What about like prearranged Vothal's laws?
Broadly speaking, I gotta say, like, as much as pre-range fights can be fun, the more we do things like that, the less we have people out diving.
I'm gonna stop the recording.